Close your eyes. The past is about to speak. When you think of the court of King Henry VIII, you might imagine a grand and romantic spectacle. You picture magnificent feasts on long oak tables, dashing knights in shining armor, and noble ladies in jeweled gowns whispering secrets behind elegant fans. It is an image of chivalry, power, and high drama, a storybook world of palaces and pageantry. But beneath the glittering surface, the reality was a far cry from the fairy tale. For most, it was a world of biting cold, pervasive dampness, and smells you can only be grateful are lost to time. It was a place of rigid rules and constant, nerve-wracking observation. You probably wouldn't last a day without accidentally offending a duke and finding yourself in very serious, very medieval trouble. Let us know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always wonderful to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The soft sound of rain has already begun to fall outside the castle walls, a gentle, steady rhythm against the stone and glass, a perfect backdrop for our story. You find yourself standing in a vast, echoing corridor of a royal palace, perhaps Greenwich, a favorite of the young king. The air is heavy and cool, carrying the scent of damp stone, wood smoke from 100 fireplaces, and the faint, sweet smell of beeswax. Your clothes, simple wool and linen, feel coarse against your skin, a constant reminder of your station. You are a fly on the wall, an invisible observer in this gilded cage. High above, narrow windows let in a pale, watery English light, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The floor beneath your feet is not the polished marble you might expect, but rough stone, strewn with a thick layer of rushes. As you take a step, you crush dried herbs mixed within them, meadowsweet, lavender, and chamomile, a constant and necessary battle against the less pleasant odors of so many people living in close quarters. It's a trick that historians confirm was a vital part of 16th century housekeeping, a fragrant but ultimately losing fight. The sound is a low, constant murmur. The rustle of heavy fabrics, velvet, brocade, and silk, accompanies the passage of lords and ladies. Their voices are a tapestry of languages. You hear the crisp tones of English, of course, but also the flowing sounds of Spanish in the Queen's retinue, the sharp cadence of a French ambassador's speech, and the gruff speech of a German merchant. This court is a crossroads of Europe, a center of power and diplomacy. In the distance, somewhere deeper in the palace, you can hear the delicate, melancholic plucking of a lute, a lonely sound that seems to get swallowed by the immense space. Your gaze is drawn to a great hall, its doors thrown open. The room is a blaze of color and life, dominated by a cavernous fireplace where a log fire crackles and spits, casting a warm, flickering glow. This is the heart of the court, and at its center is the sun around which all these planets orbit, King Henry VIII. But he is not the man from the famous portraits, not yet. There is no immense girth, no weary, suspicious scowl. The man you see is in his prime, a tall, athletic, and handsome king, exuding charisma and energy. He is laughing, a deep and resonant sound that commands the attention of everyone in the room. He is dressed in cloth of gold, his doublet slashed to reveal puffs of white silk beneath, his fingers heavy with rings. He is a Renaissance prince, educated, artistic, a musician and a jouster, the very picture of modern kingship. And beside him, a still point in this turning world, is his queen, Catherine of Aragon. She is a few years older than her husband, her Spanish heritage evident in her dark hair and her famously devout and dignified bearing. Where Henry is all vibrant, boisterous life, Catherine is composure and grace. She is dressed in the heavy, sumptuous fashion of the Spanish court, her gown of dark velvet embroidered with pearls. Her expression is serene, but you can see the quiet intelligence in her eyes. She is the daughter of the two most powerful monarchs in Christendom, Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, and she carries that legacy with an unshakable poise. You watch them together. Historians still argue about the true nature of their early marriage. Was it the great love match that contemporary poets claimed? Or was it always, from the very beginning, a political alliance held together by duty? From here, it looks like both. There is an affection there, a shared history. He was the handsome prince she was betrothed to after the tragic death of his older brother, her first husband. She was the noble princess who waited 7 long years in a foreign land for him to be old enough to take the throne and make her his queen. They have been married for years now, and in that time, she has endured multiple pregnancies, each one a flicker of hope for the kingdom, most ending in heartbreak. As you observe the court, you realize the crushing lack of what you would call personal space. Every conversation is public, every glance is noted. To be at court is to be on stage, constantly performing your role. There is no closing a door for a private chat, no sending a quick, unread message. Every word, every gesture is part of the intricate dance of power and favor. It is a world of immense wealth and profound discomfort. The tapestries hanging on the walls, depicting grand battles and biblical tales, are breathtakingly beautiful, but they do little to stop the bone-deep chill that seeps from the stone walls. A chill the roaring fire can only hold at bay, not defeat. The food being prepared for the evening feast will be elaborate and impressive, with roasted swans and intricate sugar sculptures. But the water you might be offered to drink is likely drawn from a questionable source, and the bread is gritty with stone dust from the mill. It's a life of dazzling contradictions. And for the woman at its center, Queen Catherine, the greatest contradiction of all is her position. She is the most powerful woman in England, yet her future, and the future of the kingdom itself, rests on something utterly beyond her control. Her resilience is palpable, a quiet strength that has seen her through war, political isolation, and personal grief. But you can feel the pressure mounting, a silent weight in the grand, cold air of the palace. You remain in the shadows of the great hall, the sounds of the court a constant, low hum around you, punctuated by the steady, soothing patter of the rain against the leaded glass. The initial glamour of the scene begins to fade, replaced by a keen awareness of the tension that lies just beneath the surface. It is a tension that emanates from the throne itself, a subtle current flowing from the king and rippling outwards through every courtier, every servant. It is the single, all-consuming question of succession. Your focus shifts back to Catherine of Aragon. You watch her as she moves through the court, a model of regal piety. She attends Mass daily, sometimes more than once. Her fingers are often busy with needlework, embroidering vestments for the church or shirts for the king. She is a patron of education, a wise counsel to her husband, and beloved by the common people of England, who see her as the epitome of a true and rightful queen. But none of that matters as much as the one duty she has not yet fulfilled. She has not given Henry a living son. You feel the weight of those failures as if they were your own. You imagine the hope of each pregnancy, the prayers whispered in the royal chapel, the collective breath-holding of an entire kingdom. And then, the crushing grief of a stillbirth, or the death of an infant in the cradle. In this era, without the reassurances of modern medicine, every pregnancy is a perilous journey. There are no ultrasound scans to check on the baby, no understanding of blood types or genetic abnormalities. A successful birth is seen as a sign of God's favor, and a failure, well, a failure is a sign of His displeasure. And that divine judgment falls squarely on the woman. You see the fleeting moments of joy. There was the birth of a boy, little Henry, Duke of Cornwall, born on New Year's Day in 1511. The celebrations were ecstatic. A great tournament was held, the king himself jousting in honor of his heir. For 52 brief days, the future of the Tudor dynasty seemed secure. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief that must have swept through these very halls. Then, just as quickly, the hope was extinguished. The little prince died, and the court was plunged back into mourning and uncertainty. Historians often point to this single event as a turning point, the moment when the king's anxiety began to curdle into a more dangerous obsession. Now, years later, the only surviving child of this union is a girl, Princess Mary. You see her occasionally, a small, serious child with her mother's dark hair and her father's reddish complexion. She is precocious and intelligent, fluent in multiple languages and a gifted musician. The king adores her. He calls her the pearl of his realm and proudly shows her off to foreign ambassadors. But you can see the conflict in his eyes. He loves the daughter he has, but he desperately craves the son he does not. In the brutal politics of the 16th century, a daughter is not enough. A female ruler is seen as a weakness, an invitation for civil war and foreign invasion. The memory of the Wars of the Roses, a bloody dynastic conflict that tore England apart just a few decades earlier, is still fresh and raw. The Tudor claim to the throne is new, and many feel it is fragile. A strong male heir is not just a desire, it is a political necessity. You sense the mounting pressure on Catherine. Every month that passes without a new pregnancy is a quiet failure. The whispers in the corridors grow a little louder. Courtiers exchange knowing glances. You can almost taste the bitterness of her situation. She eats the food of a queen, rich, spiced meats, delicate tarts, and imported fruits. But every meal must feel like a prelude to another disappointment. The wine in her goblet, a fine vintage from Spain, cannot wash away the fear. There are no self-help books here, no therapists to talk to. Her only recourse is prayer, a constant, fervent appeal to a silent heaven. It is this desperation that leads to one of the period's more peculiar historical tidbits. You hear rumors of the Queen's extreme piety, her fasting, her constant attendance at chilly, damp chapels, even walking barefoot on pilgrimages. While this was seen as admirable, some modern historians speculate that Catherine's intense austerity and possible resulting low body weight may have inadvertently made it even harder for her to conceive and carry a child to term. It's a tragic irony. The very actions she took to beseech God for a child might have been preventing one. As the years tick by, you watch the king change. The charming, athletic youth is still there, but a new hardness is setting in. His gaze lingers longer on the young, fertile wives of his noblemen. He starts to openly question his marriage in theological terms. He delves into scripture, specifically a passage in the book of Leviticus that says a man who marries his brother's widow will be childless. This, he begins to believe, is the source of his curse. He had received a special permission from the Pope to marry Catherine in the first place, but now he wonders if even the Pope had the authority to override God's law. You are witnessing the birth of an idea, a single, dangerous thought taking root in the king's mind. It is the seed of a revolution. He is not just questioning his marriage, he is questioning the authority of the church itself. Catherine, ever dignified, stands firm. Her marriage is valid, she insists. She was the true and anointed Queen of England, and their daughter Mary was the legitimate heir. Her resilience is formidable. She has weathered diplomatic storms and personal tragedies. She has ruled England as regent while Henry was off fighting wars. She is not a woman who will be easily set aside. But the king's will is a powerful force, and his desire for a son is becoming an all-consuming fire. And in the queen's own household, among her ladies-in-waiting, a new face has appeared. A young woman with striking dark eyes and a sharp wit, who seems to have captured the king's wandering attention in a way no one else ever has. Her name is Anne Boleyn, and her arrival marks the beginning of the end for the world Catherine has so painstakingly built. The rain continues its gentle percussion outside the palace, a soft counterpoint to the growing tension within. You feel it now, a subtle shift in the air, a sharpening of glances, a nervous energy that wasn't there before. The magnificent court, once seemingly united around King Henry and Queen Catherine, is fracturing. The source of this rift, the quiet storm brewing beneath the surface of courtly politeness, is a woman. Her name, whispered in hushed tones, is Anne Boleyn. You see her now, not yet in the prominent position she will eventually hold, but moving amongst the Queen's ladies, a graceful figure in the rich, yet somewhat restrictive, fashions of the era. Her gowns are of fine velvet or silk, perhaps in a deep green or a rich blue, designed to emphasize her slender, elegant form. She has a reputation for being fashionable, even daring in her choice of attire. Her hair, famously long and dark, is often styled in elaborate braids or coils. But it is her eyes that are truly striking. Dark, intelligent, and piercing, they seem to miss nothing. And her mouth, wide and expressive, is quick to smile or offer a witty retort. This is not a woman of demure beauty in the traditional sense, but one of captivating vivacity and sharp intellect. This departure from conventional beauty standards is often noted by historians, who point out that her charm lay not in classic prettiness, but in her charisma and quick mind. You observe the king's increasing fascination with her. At first, it is subtle, a lingering glance, a shared laugh that seems to last a beat too long. Then, his attention becomes more overt. He seeks her out in crowded rooms, his eyes following her movements. He dances with her more often than with others. He writes her letters, sometimes several a day, filled with fervent declarations. You watch as she navigates this intense attention with a skillful blend of resistance and encouragement. She knows the rules of the court. To give in too easily would be to risk becoming just another one of the king's mistresses. And Anne Boleyn, you quickly realize, desires something far more profound than that. She desires the throne. The atmosphere in the palace becomes thick with unspoken desires and anxieties. The scent of sweet perfumes, mingled with the pervasive odor of wood smoke, cannot entirely mask the underlying scent of fear. You notice how courtiers divide themselves subtly, almost imperceptibly. Some cling closer to Queen Catherine, their loyalty a quiet defiance. Others gravitate towards the king's orbit, sensing the shift in power, their ambition a sharp, desperate hunger. Dinners in the great hall, once boisterous and carefree, now feel charged. You can almost feel the uncomfortable triangulation between Henry, Catherine, and Anne. Imagine the feeling, the sheer awkwardness of being seated at a table where the tension is so palpable, you could almost cut it with your dagger. There's no escaping it, no excuse to leave early. You are simply there, witnessing the slow-motion collapse of a royal marriage in front of a live audience. It must have felt like a never-ending, highly uncomfortable family dinner, but with far higher stakes. This period, sometimes called the King's Great Matter, stretches on for 7 long years. 7 years of intricate negotiations, theological debates, and political maneuvering. The king, consumed by his desire for Anne and for a male heir, becomes increasingly convinced that his marriage to Catherine is invalid in the eyes of God. He cites the biblical passage from Leviticus, which states that a man who marries his brother's wife will be childless. Catherine, however, steadfastly maintains that her first marriage to Arthur, Henry's elder brother, was never consummated, therefore rendering the Leviticus passage irrelevant. She appeals directly to the Pope, arguing her case with unwavering conviction. You hear the constant discussions, the legal arguments debated by scholars and lawyers, the endless letters sent to Rome and back. The sound of quill pens scratching on parchment fills the private chambers of advisors. The distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer, a familiar background noise to everyday life, seems almost peaceful compared to the relentless mental clang of the king's internal struggle. Historians still widely debate whether Henry truly believed his conscience was tormented by God's law or whether it was a convenient theological justification for his infatuation and desire for a son. Regardless, his conviction, whether genuine or self-serving, becomes the engine of an unprecedented revolution. The air thickens with religious rhetoric. Sermons in churches across England begin to echo the king's arguments, subtly at first, then more boldly. The authority of the Pope is quietly, then loudly questioned. For centuries, The Pope in Rome has been the spiritual head of all Christendom, his word law. To challenge him is to challenge the very fabric of European society. Yet you see Henry's determination harden with each papal refusal. His face, once jovial, now bears the lines of frustration and growing impatience. Anne Boleyn, meanwhile, does not simply wait passively. She is an active participant in this drama, providing intellectual support, suggesting books and reformers for the king to consult, and pushing for a decisive break with Rome. Her influence on Henry is undeniable. She is not just a mistress. She is an intellectual companion, a fellow traveler on this revolutionary path. She is the first woman in English history to have such profound political and religious influence over a reigning monarch, a fact that both enthralls and terrifies the conservative elements of the court. Her resilience and intelligence in surviving for so long in such a precarious position, constantly under scrutiny, is remarkable. The stakes could not be higher, and you can sense the kingdom holding its breath, poised on the precipice of a monumental, irreversible change. The relentless rain outside the palace walls mirrors the storm brewing within the kingdom, a tempest of political and religious upheaval. The air in the court is no longer merely tense. It vibrates with an almost unbearable pressure. The sound of hushed conversations and the rustle of heavy robes have taken on a furtive quality. Every individual, from the highest noble to the lowliest scullery maid, feels the approaching seismic shift. You witness the escalating conflict as Henry VIII, increasingly frustrated by the Pope's unwavering refusal to annul his marriage to Catherine, begins to dismantle centuries of tradition. He is convinced, or at least he says he is convinced, that God has cursed his marriage. He believes that the only way to lift this curse and secure a legitimate male heir for his kingdom is to declare his marriage to Catherine null and void from the very beginning. This wasn't just a divorce in the modern sense. It was an annulment, a declaration that the marriage had never been valid in God's eyes. The taste of fear becomes almost literal in your mouth as you observe the unfolding events. People who previously held positions of power and influence, who spoke out against the king's radical ideas, suddenly find themselves out of favor, imprisoned, or worse. The concept of freedom of speech, as you know it, simply does not exist. To disagree with the king's will, especially on such a fundamental issue, is to invite ruin. You see men who were once respected scholars now pale and nervous, forced to sign documents affirming the king's new doctrines. There's no Yelp review for a questionable execution, no online forum to complain about religious persecution. You simply comply or you perish. The sound of theological debate fills the air, but it's no longer polite academic discussion. It's a charged, often angry exchange. Henry surrounds himself with advisors who support his cause, men like Thomas Cranmer, a quietly reformist clergyman, and Thomas Cromwell, a brilliant, ruthless, and pragmatic lawyer. Together, they begin to construct the legal framework that will enable the king to bypass papal authority entirely. This period is a fascinating example of how deeply interwoven faith, politics, and personal desire were in the Tudor era. It wasn't simply a matter of the king wanting a new wife. It was framed as a crisis of conscience, a matter of national destiny and divine will. You observe the passage of crucial legislation through Parliament, an institution that Henry skillfully manipulates to rubber stamp his desires. The Act in Restraint of Appeals is passed, making it illegal to appeal to Rome on any matter. This effectively cuts off Catherine's last legal recourse. Then comes the Act of Supremacy, a truly revolutionary document. With this act passed in 1534, Henry declares himself the supreme head of the Church of England. This isn't just a political move, it's a theological earthquake. For 1,000 years, the Pope had held ultimate spiritual authority in England. Now, that authority is stripped away and placed squarely in the hands of the king. It's a fact that still shapes England today. Imagine the atmosphere in the monasteries and convents across England during this time. The long tradition of monastic life, once the bedrock of the Catholic faith, is now under threat. You hear the stories of commissioners arriving, taking inventories of sacred treasures, assessing the wealth of these ancient institutions. The air smells not just of damp stone, but also of radical change, of things being pulled up from their deep roots. Historians still argue about the primary motivation behind the dissolution of the monasteries. Was it primarily religious reform? Or was it a convenient way for the king to seize immense wealth to fund his wars and lavish lifestyle? Through it all, Catherine of Aragon remains resolute. She refuses to acknowledge the annulment, continues to refer to herself as Queen of England, and defiantly supports her daughter, Princess Mary, as the true heir. You sense her quiet dignity, her unyielding conviction even in the face of immense pressure. She is stripped of her title, exiled from court, and separated from her beloved daughter. Yet her spirit remains unbroken. Her resilience in these final, lonely years is truly astonishing. Then the moment arrives. In January of 1533, Thomas Cranmer, now Archbishop of Canterbury, finally declares Henry's marriage to Catherine null and void. A few months later in May, he pronounces the king's marriage to Anne Boleyn valid. The transformation is complete. You are now in Westminster Abbey on a cool, damp June day in 1533. The air is thick with incense, overlaid with the rich scent of new fabric and the anticipation of history in the making. The crowds outside are immense, a sea of faces, some cheering, some silent, perhaps even fearful. The sound of bells ringing across London is deafening, a triumphant, almost aggressive peal. You watch as Anne Boleyn, radiant in her coronation robes of purple velvet and ermine, enters the abbey. She is heavily pregnant, her condition a public declaration of the success of the king's gamble. She is crowned Queen of England, her crown sparkling with jewels, her scepter held high. The gold of her gown catches the light, reflecting the precarious splendor of her moment. The transition from Catherine to Anne is stark, brutal, and irreversible. England is no longer Catholic in allegiance to Rome. It is now an independent Protestant nation under the supreme authority of its king. This profound shift, initiated by a king's personal desire, would have ramifications for centuries to come, leading to religious conflicts, wars, and eventually, shaping the very identity of the English nation. The quiet hum of rain now feels like the soft whisper of destiny. The coronation bells have faded, their triumphant clang replaced by the usual, quieter sounds of court life, though now with an undercurrent of unease. The persistent rain outside seems to murmur a prelude to what is to come. Anne Boleyn, now Queen Anne, sits on the throne she fought so hard to obtain, her position seemingly secure. Yet, as you observe her in the months and years following her coronation, a new, chilling tension begins to settle around her. The air in the royal apartments, though still scented with rose water and polished wood, feels thin, almost brittle. Her first great duty, the reason for the revolution, is to provide the king with a male heir. In September of 1533, you witness the birth of her first child. The court holds its breath. Messengers are ready to race across England with the joyous news of a prince. But the news that arrives is not of a prince. It is of a princess. The child is a girl named Elizabeth. You see the king's face, initially hopeful, cloud over with disappointment. The cheers of the populace, though genuine for the new princess, are not quite as fervent as they would have been for a boy. A historical tidbit that is both quirky and heartbreaking. The elaborate birth announcements, including plans for a tournament, had been prepared in advance with blanks for the baby's gender. The prince part had to be hastily changed to princess, a small detail that speaks volumes about the depth of the king's expectation. Despite this initial setback, Henry is still devoted to Anne. He believes a son will surely follow, but as the months turn into years, the familiar pattern of Catherine's reign begins to repeat itself. There are more pregnancies, more hopes, and more heartbreaks. A miscarriage here, a stillbirth there. Each loss chips away at the king's affection, and at Anne's precarious hold on the crown. The sweet scent of hope begins to turn stale, replaced by the bitter tang of anxiety. You notice the changing dynamics at court. Those who had been Anne's fiercest supporters now seem to distance themselves slightly. The Boleyn faction, once so powerful, feels the ground shifting beneath their feet. The king's eyes, which once lingered on Anne with adoration, now dart elsewhere, searching for new diversions, new promises of a son. He begins to visit other noble households, his restlessness a palpable force. The once witty Queen Anne, who captivated Henry with her intelligence and spirit, is now prone to outbursts, to arguments with the king, especially over their lack of a male heir. She sees the danger approaching, the familiar shadow of Catherine's fate looming over her own head. The court, once a stage for her triumph, now feels like a gilded cage, its walls closing in. The sounds of laughter become less frequent in her presence, replaced by the hushed whispers of her enemies, eager to see her fall. By the spring of 1536, the king has lost patience. Anne's last pregnancy, a miscarriage of a male fetus, is the final straw. He sees it once again as a sign of God's displeasure. But this time, it is Anne who is deemed to be the source of the divine curse. The king's advisors, particularly the ambitious Thomas Cromwell who had helped orchestrate Anne's rise, now turn their considerable talents to her downfall. The accusations against her are swift, brutal, and utterly shocking. You hear the terrible words echoing through the palace: adultery, incest, treason. She is accused of sleeping with multiple men, including her own brother, George Boleyn. These charges are almost certainly fabricated, a desperate attempt to create a legal basis for her execution. But in the volatile world of the Tudor court, mere accusation is often enough. The air thickens with malicious gossip and frantic denials. The heavy doors of the Tower of London loom large in the minds of everyone. You feel the terrifying speed of her descent. One day she is queen, dining in sumptuous halls. The next, she is arrested and taken by barge down the Thames to the Tower, the very place she had once sailed past in triumph. The sound of the river lapping against the boat, once a symbol of royal passage, now carries her to imprisonment. You watch helpless as the trials unfold. They are not trials of justice, but of political necessity. Her accusers are her former friends, her supposed lovers tortured into false confessions. The feel of hopelessness settles over the court. There is no escape. Anne, despite her fear, maintains her innocence with remarkable courage. In her final days in the Tower, she composes a beautiful, poignant poem, a testament to her spirit even in the face of certain death. This is one of the most stark examples of human resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. On a bleak morning in May of 1536, just 3 years after her coronation, you stand in the Tower grounds. The persistent rain has paused, leaving the air damp and chilly. A small crowd has gathered, silent and somber. The executioner, a man brought specially from France, stands ready, holding a sharp, gleaming sword. The execution by sword is considered more honorable than the axe. Anne Boleyn walks with dignity to the scaffold, dressed in a gray damask gown trimmed with ermine, her dark hair tucked beneath a coif. Her last words are of prayer for the king and an assertion of her innocence. You hear the final, chilling sound of the sword as it falls, a sharp, dreadful whisper in the cold morning air. And just like that, Anne Boleyn, the woman who overturned a kingdom for love and power, is gone. Her body is unceremoniously buried in the Tower Chapel. Before her body is even cold, the king, already planning his next move, is making arrangements to marry again. The faint sound of new wedding preparations can almost be heard through the palace, a testament to the king's terrifying efficiency and single-minded pursuit of a son. The sound of the rain outside has softened to a mere whisper, a gentle murmur against the casement windows, as if the very sky holds its breath after the recent, brutal events. A chilling quiet descends upon the court, a stark contrast to the tumultuous drama that just unfolded. The execution of Anne Boleyn has left a profound impact, a collective trauma that hangs in the air like a pall. You can almost taste the fear, a metallic tang on your tongue, reminding everyone of the king's absolute and terrifying power. But the king, Henry VIII, does not dwell on the past. His gaze is already fixed on the future, and on the woman who he believes will finally provide him with the longed-for male heir. Her name is Jane Seymour, and she is a striking contrast to the vibrant, assertive Anne Boleyn. Where Anne was dark and vivacious, Jane is fair-haired and pale, with a quiet, almost demure demeanor. Her eyes are light, her expression often serene. She embodies the traditional ideal of a Tudor lady, obedient, virtuous, and modest. Her motto, "Bound to obey and serve," encapsulates her publicly displayed humility, a stark and deliberate contrast to Anne's perceived boldness. You observe her now, moving through the royal apartments. Her gowns are simpler than Anne's, often in whites, creams, or soft pastels, emphasizing her gentle nature. There's a noticeable lack of the sharp wit and intellectual debate that characterized Anne's interactions with the king. Instead, Jane offers quiet companionship, a soothing presence to the increasingly volatile monarch. The air around her seems calmer, less charged. You might even detect the scent of lavender and fresh linen, a clean, unembellished presence after the heady perfumes and political intrigues of Anne's reign. The speed with which Henry moves is breathtaking. Less than a month after Anne's execution, on a crisp morning in May of 1536, the King and Jane Seymour are married in a quiet, private ceremony at York Place. There are no grand celebrations, no public displays of affection. The kingdom, still reeling from the shock of the previous queen's demise, observes a cautious silence. It is a marriage born not of passion, but of a desperate, consuming need for security and a male succession. You watch as Jane steps into her role as queen. She is respectful, unassuming, and keenly aware of the pitfalls that befell her predecessors. She endeavors to restore Princess Mary, Henry's daughter by Catherine of Aragon, to the royal favor, even urging the king to reconcile with her. This act of quiet compassion is a testament to her character and a smart political move, as it helped to stabilize the court and gain public approval. The sounds in the royal nursery, once filled with the eager anticipation of a prince that never came for Catherine or Anne, are now hushed with a new kind of hopeful expectation. The great hall, once a place of tense religious debate under Anne, now resonates with a more traditional hum. Jane is not a reformer like Anne. She is conservative in her religious views, preferring the old ways, but she is also pragmatic and wise enough not to challenge the king's new supremacy. This carefully balanced approach ensures a period of relative domestic peace for Henry, a calm between two storms. Historians often debate the true extent of Jane Seymour's influence. Was she merely a placid figurehead? Or did her quiet resilience and subtle counsel play a more significant role in the king's domestic and religious policies during her brief reign? It's a question without a definitive answer, lost to the nuances of courtly power. The air in the palace is filled with a new kind of expectation. The king, now nearing his mid-40s and experiencing the first signs of the health problems that would plague his later life, is more desperate than ever for a son. His leg ulcer, a chronic and painful condition, is beginning to make its unwelcome presence known, adding to his irritability and urgency. And then, in the autumn of 1537, the kingdom holds its breath once more. Queen Jane enters confinement at Hampton Court Palace, ready to give birth. The rain has temporarily ceased, replaced by crisp autumn air, but the tension inside is thick and palpable. For 3 long days and nights, the sounds of her labor echo through the palace. You can almost feel the collective anxiety of an entire nation. The court is on edge, praying fervently. The future of the Tudor dynasty, the very stability of England, hangs in the balance. There are no modern epidurals, no pain relief beyond prayer and sheer human endurance. You wouldn't last a day. Finally, on the 12th of October, a cry rings out that sweeps through the palace like wildfire, eliciting cheers and tears of relief. It is the sound of a strong, healthy baby boy. The long-awaited heir has arrived. He is named Edward. The celebrations that follow are immense, truly unprecedented. Bells ring out across London for days, bonfires are lit on every hill, and feasts are held in every town. The king is ecstatic. He has his son, his living, breathing legacy. The smell of victory, of divine favor, fills the air. The relief is so profound it is almost dizzying. You can almost hear the collective sigh of a kingdom finally, truly, able to breathe. But the triumph is short-lived. Just over 2 weeks after giving birth, Queen Jane contracts puerperal fever, a common and often fatal infection of childbirth in this era. You watch as her health rapidly deteriorates. The joyous sounds of the royal nursery are tragically replaced by the hushed, anxious whispers of physicians and the mournful prayers of the court. Despite the finest care available, her fever rises, her strength wanes. The fragrant scent of autumn flowers brought into her chamber cannot mask the scent of impending tragedy. On the 24th of October, 1537, Queen Jane Seymour dies at Hampton Court. The cost of Henry's longed-for son is the life of the woman who provided him. Her death plunges the king into deep mourning, perhaps the truest grief he ever publicly displayed for a wife. He wears black for months, a rare display of vulnerability for a monarch so focused on power and image. She is given a magnificent funeral and buried in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, the only one of his 6 wives to receive a queen's burial alongside him. Her ultimate act of resilience was giving birth to the heir the kingdom so desperately needed, even at the cost of her own life. The rain begins to fall again, a quiet, sorrowful drizzle, washing over the palace and the grief-stricken king, who now has his son, but is once again a widower. The quest for more heirs, however, would soon begin anew. The quiet sorrow of the rain which had accompanied Jane Seymour's passing slowly gives way to a restless energy. The court, and more importantly, the king, cannot remain in perpetual mourning. Prince Edward, the longed-for son, is still a fragile infant. The Tudor dynasty, for all its new heir, remains vulnerable. The king is once again a widower, and the desperate search for another wife, another potential mother to more sons, begins. You observe the machinations of the court. The air is thick with the scent of ambition and political calculation. Thomas Cromwell, the king's powerful chief minister, now at the height of his influence, takes on the task of finding Henry a suitable consort. The political landscape of Europe is shifting. England, having broken with Rome, finds itself somewhat isolated. A Protestant alliance, particularly with the German states, seems strategically advantageous. This leads Cromwell to propose a match with Anne of Cleves, the sister of the Duke of Cleves, a powerful German prince. You hear the discussions about her. She is described as virtuous, pious, and a good prospect. But there are whispers, too, tales of a cloistered upbringing in a conservative court where dancing and music are not encouraged. and where ladies are not educated in the finer arts of courtly life, like flirtation or witty conversation. You can almost feel the cultural clash brewing, a subtle scent of misaligned expectations. Before the princess arrives, a renowned artist, Hans Holbein the Younger, is dispatched to paint her portrait. You can imagine the scene in Cleves, the solemn sitting, the careful rendering of her features. When the portrait arrives in England, it is magnificent. You see it displayed for the king, a beautiful woman with a serene face, fine features, and a pleasant demeanor. The colors are rich, the details exquisite. The king, relying on this visual representation, is pleased. He has high hopes. He believes he has found his next queen, one who is both beautiful and politically advantageous. This is a crucial mainstream historical fact, the reliance on portraits for royal marriage arrangements. Now, you anticipate Anne of Cleves' arrival. The journey itself is an epic undertaking. You follow in your mind's eye as she leaves her home, a journey that takes weeks, perhaps even months, across rough seas and through unfamiliar lands. The weather, even for a royal progress, would have been brutal. You can almost feel the biting cold of the winter winds, the dampness seeping into every layer of her heavy travel clothes. The smell of stale provisions, horses, and unwashed bodies would have filled her carriage. There are no heated seats, no comfortable rest stops, no way to freshen up after days on the road. Her skin, accustomed to the sheltered indoors, must have been chafed and wind-burnt. Her muscles, unused to such prolonged travel, must have ached. It's an arduous, uncomfortable, and utterly exhausting experience for anyone, let alone a woman destined to be a queen. There's no modern GPS or flight tracking to ease the anxiety of arrival. Every mile is a slow, uncertain creep towards destiny. The day finally arrives for the king and his bride-to-be to meet. It is New Year's Day, 1540, at Rochester. Henry, in a whimsical mood, decides to surprise her. He dresses in plain clothes, eager to catch a glimpse of her unawares, to truly see her before the formalities begin. You watch as he enters the room where she is waiting, playing cards with her ladies. He expects her to immediately recognize him, to be captivated by his royal presence even in disguise. But Anne, raised in a court where such casual informality was unheard of, doesn't react as he expects. She pays him no special attention, perhaps assuming he is just another courtier. She continues her game. You feel the king's mounting irritation. His face, initially expectant, hardens with disappointment. The subtle scent of the palace's festive preparations, roast meats, spiced wine, and pine boughs, is suddenly soured by the king's growing displeasure. He approaches her, reveals his identity, but the moment is ruined. His grand romantic gesture has fallen flat. You can almost hear his internal monologue, a frustrated groan of, "This is not what I ordered." What Henry sees in that moment is not the graceful, delicate woman of Holbein's portrait. Instead, he sees a tall, somewhat heavy-set woman with a plain face, smallpox scars, and a demeanor that he considers entirely unrefined. Her Flemish dress, which was perfectly fashionable in her homeland, strikes him as cumbersome and old-fashioned. Her lack of English and his lack of German make communication difficult, amplifying the awkwardness. He later famously complains, in perhaps the most brutal first impression review ever, that she looked like a Flanders mare. It's a shocking, if memorable, insult and a clear indication of his immediate, visceral rejection. A quirky historical tidbit. It's believed that Holbein's portrait, while accurate, probably flattered her by minimizing her smallpox scars and presenting her in the best possible light. The king's disappointment is palpable. You feel it radiating off him like heat from a furnace. He is disgusted. He attempts to renege on the marriage, desperately seeking a loophole. He complains of her body odor, though it's important to note that standards of personal hygiene were vastly different then. Many nobles rarely bathed, masking odors with perfumes and heavily laundered linen. Historians often debate whether his complaints about her smell and appearance were genuine or simply an excuse to escape an inconvenient political marriage that no longer served his purposes. We can only speculate about the true depth of his revulsion, but the outcome is clear. So before this great story continues, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're enjoying our journey together. Your support means the world. Thomas Cromwell, who championed this alliance, is now in a state of utter panic. His entire career rests on this marriage, and he has inadvertently brought the king face to face with a woman he cannot stand. The rain, which had briefly paused, now begins to intensify, its rhythmic drumming against the windows a fitting backdrop to the escalating crisis. The palace, once filled with the hopeful anticipation of a new queen, is now thick with the scent of unspoken failure. Yet in this immense disaster, Anne of Cleves displays an unexpected form of resilience. She does not scream. She does not rage. She remains quiet, dignified, and surprisingly pragmatic in the face of such public humiliation. Her ability to navigate this complete disaster with such composure is a testament to an inner strength that belies her seemingly demure exterior. The king's immediate goal, you realize, is to rid himself of this unwanted wife, and the fate of Thomas Cromwell, who had steered England through so much change, now hangs by the thinnest of threads, as precarious as a single raindrop clinging to a window pane. The king's disgust with Anne of Cleves is a palpable thing, a heavy cloud that hangs over the court, making the air feel stale and sour. The rain outside has settled into a rhythmic, steady patter, almost like a sigh. Henry is determined to extricate himself from this unfortunate marriage, and fast. Thomas Cromwell, who had championed the Cleves match, finds himself caught in the king's fury. The minister, once so powerful, is now accused of treason and heresy. And within weeks of the king's public rejection of Anne, Cromwell himself is imprisoned in the Tower. You hear the whispers of his downfall, the grim satisfaction of his many enemies. It's a stark reminder that even the most indispensable servant is vulnerable to the king's displeasure. Cromwell, who had done so much to build the king's New England, is executed in July of 1540, a brutal, swift end to a formidable career. His demise serves as a chilling testament to the king's ruthlessness and his burning desire for a new queen. With Cromwell gone, Henry is free to pursue his desires without restraint, and his desire has already landed on a new target. Her name is Catherine Howard. She is barely 18 years old, a young woman of the noble house of Norfolk, and a first cousin to the ill-fated Anne Boleyn. You see her now, a vibrant splash of color in the often somber Tudor court. She is small and pretty, with an infectious laugh and an undeniable vivacity. Her dark eyes sparkle, and her movements are light and quick, a stark contrast to the stolid, quiet demeanor of Anne of Cleves. The air around her seems to shimmer with youthful energy, a delightful scent of fresh flowers and perhaps a hint of sweet citrus, like orange blossoms. The aging king, now 49 years old and increasingly afflicted by his painful leg ulcer and growing corpulence, is utterly enchanted. He finds in Catherine a fleeting return to his own youth, a mirroring of the athletic, boisterous man he once was. She flatters him, dances with him, laughs at his jokes, and provides the zest for life that had been so conspicuously absent with Anne of Cleves. It's a familiar story, one you might recognize even in your own time. The powerful man seeking renewed vitality in the company of a much younger, more vibrant partner. Imagine the court rolling their collective eyes, not daring to do so outwardly, as the king, in his midlife crisis, attempts to recapture his lost youth through a teenager. There's no reality television show documenting this, but it has all the hallmarks of one. The speed of the king's new romance is astonishing. Anne of Cleves, having proven remarkably compliant, agrees to an annulment based on a pre-contract with another man that had never been officially broken. She is given a generous settlement, including palaces and a large income, and becomes the king's sister, a surprisingly comfortable and safe position. It is a testament to her quiet resilience that she adapts to this new, diminished but secure status. Within weeks of Cromwell's execution and Anne of Cleves' annulment, on July 28, 1540, Henry marries Catherine Howard in a private ceremony at Oatlands Palace. There are no grand public celebrations, no fanfares. The kingdom has become accustomed to the king's marital revolving door. You observe the new queen at court. She brings a fresh lightness. The atmosphere in the royal apartments is instantly transformed. The music played is more lively, the dancing more energetic. You hear the sweet sound of lutes and viols playing fast, joyful tunes. The food on the tables is lavish, even more so than usual, with delicate pastries and sweet wines. The king lavishes her with gifts, jewels, rich gowns of silk and velvet, and grand estates. She is young and enjoys these indulgences, embracing her new role with enthusiasm. She seems to embody the rose without a thorn that her family, the ambitious Howards, hope she will be for the king. For Henry, Catherine is a balm. His spirits lift dramatically. He feels young again, invigorated. He calls her his rose without a thorn and his perfect pearl. The sight of them together is a strange mix. The immense, aging monarch, his leg wrapped in bandages beneath his lavish clothes, often being wheeled about or helped by attendants, yet his eyes alight with a boyish infatuation, and beside him the tiny, laughing queen, full of life. It's a mainstream historical fact that Henry's physical health was in serious decline by this point, making his youthful bride a stark contrast. However, you begin to notice subtle differences in Catherine's demeanor compared to previous queens. While charming, she doesn't possess the intellectual depth of Anne Boleyn or the quiet wisdom of Jane Seymour. Her education has been less formal, her upbringing more lax. She has been raised in the household of her formidable step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, a household known for being somewhat less strict than others of the nobility. You hear fragmented whispers from her past, stories of indiscretions and flirtations that seem at odds with the pure, innocent image she projects. The smell of secrets, faint at first, begins to mingle with the festive sense of the court. Historians still debate the true nature of Catherine Howard's character. Was she simply a naive girl caught in a dangerous game beyond her understanding? Or was she a frivolous, even reckless young woman, ill-equipped for the immense pressures of queenship? We can only speculate about the depth of her understanding of the stakes involved. The court, for all its glittering surface, is a place where every vulnerability is exploited, every weakness exposed. Catherine, for all her charm and youth, may be more vulnerable than she appears. Her delight in her new status, her love of dancing and gifts, appears genuine, but it masks a deeper inexperience and perhaps a dangerous naivete. The constant sound of the rain, which had once seemed mournful, now feels like a gentle, almost mocking patter, a soft drumbeat counting down to an unseen, inevitable moment. For now the king is happy, and the court breathes a collective, cautious sigh of relief, content in this brief, sunny interlude. The soothing, ceaseless patter of the rain outside seems to mock the fragile peace that has settled over the court. For a brief, intoxicating period, King Henry has found solace and joy with his young Queen Catherine Howard. The palace halls, filled with her laughter and the lively sounds of music and dancing, seem to have banished the specters of past queens. You watched her, a vivacious figure, flitting through the royal apartments, an undeniable charm about her. The air, once thick with the scent of political anxiety, now carried the lighter, sweeter aroma of youth and newfound contentment. But beneath this glittering surface, a sinister current is beginning to stir. The very innocence and lack of inhibition that charmed the king are precisely what now threaten to unravel her. Catherine Howard, for all her royal elevation, did not come from a sheltered, strictly controlled upbringing like many noblewomen destined for greatness. She spent her formative years from the age of 10 or so in the bustling, often chaotic, household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. This was a place where many young noble children were sent for their education and upbringing, a common practice of the time. But the Duchess, an elderly woman, often traveled or was otherwise preoccupied, leaving the young ladies under the less vigilant eye of her household staff. You begin to hear the whispers, faint at first, then growing louder, carrying the bitter taste of scandal. It is the insidious sound of a past that refuses to stay buried. The Duchess's household, while grand, was by some accounts rather lax, a place where young women had more freedom than was perhaps appropriate. And Catherine, young and impressionable, had formed relationships and engaged in activities that, for a future queen, were nothing short of catastrophic. You hear the names. Henry Manox, her music teacher, who, it is alleged, taught her more than just notes. He taught her about her secret parts, engaging in physical intimacies that would be scandalous for any young lady, let alone one of her station. The smell of deceit, like a faint, acrid smoke, begins to creep into the perfumed air of the court. Then there is Francis Derryham, a distant kinsman and secretary in the household. With him, the relationship was far more serious. He openly referred to her as his wife, and she him as her husband. They shared a bed, a physical intimacy that in the Tudor period, even without formal marriage vows, was considered highly compromising, especially if a contract or promise to marry had been exchanged. This is a mainstream historical fact that shocked even contemporary society. Catherine's premarital sexual history was far more extensive than that of any previous queen. The sheer recklessness of these early indiscretions is breathtaking, particularly when viewed through the lens of Tudor court expectations. A queen had to be virginal, her purity unquestionable, to ensure the legitimacy of the royal line. Any hint of premarital activity, let alone a pre-contract that could be argued as a binding marriage, made her queenship utterly precarious. It's a bit like having a scandalously unfiltered social media history come to light just as you're about to be sworn into a high political office. Except the consequences here are literally life and death. There's no modern damage control, no PR team to spin the narrative or delete old posts. The first crack in Catherine's seemingly perfect new reality comes through a letter, an anonymous missive delivered to Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is still a powerful figure at court and a staunch supporter of the Protestant reforms. The letter, penned by a disgruntled former servant from the Duchess's household, details Catherine's past with Derryham and Manox. You imagine the cold dread that must have settled over Cranmer as he read it, the ink on the parchment seemingly turning to ice beneath his fingers. He knows the king's volatile temper, his obsession with legitimacy, and his readiness to strike down any perceived betrayal. The sound of the king's leg ulcer being dressed, a familiar, unpleasant sound echoing from his private chambers, feels almost benign compared to the quiet, terrifying unraveling of his new marriage. The investigation begins discreetly. Cranmer, a shrewd and cautious man, does not immediately go to the king. Instead, he begins to interview those who were once in the Duchess's household, piecing together the damning truth. The feeling in the palace becomes one of suppressed panic, a silent horror movie unfolding in slow motion. You can almost feel the walls listening, every shadow holding a secret. One by one, the former servants are questioned, under duress, and perhaps with promises of leniency or threats of torture. They begin to confess what they know. The sound of their testimonies, forced and fearful, echoes in the small interrogation rooms. Derryham and Manox are quickly apprehended. Their confessions, though extracted under pressure, confirm the shocking allegations. Derryham, in particular, continues to call Catherine his wife before God, a declaration that, if true, would mean her marriage to Henry was invalid and any children illegitimate. This situation reveals a quirky but grim aspect of Tudor law, the concept of pre-contract. A verbal agreement to marry, especially if followed by consummation, could be legally binding, making any subsequent marriage bigamous. It was a loophole that could be used to annul marriages, as Henry had done with Anne of Cleves, but it was also a weapon that could destroy a queen. You observe Catherine Howard during this period. She is young, foolish perhaps, but also a product of her environment. Historians still argue about her culpability. Was she an active participant in these affairs, or merely a naive girl taken advantage of by older men? Was she aware of the immense risk her past posed, or did she simply believe it would remain buried? We can only speculate about the true extent of her understanding of the precariousness of her position. Her resilience, which allowed her to capture the king's attention, is now put to the ultimate test against the weight of her own history. The sweet scent of her perfumes, the rustle of her rich gowns, the sound of her innocent laughter, all now seem tragically ironic. The palace, once a vibrant backdrop for her joyous reign, has become a stage for her impending ruin. The heavy rain outside has changed its character. It is no longer soothing, but cold, relentless, a perfect accompaniment to the cold, undeniable truths that are now about to be laid bare before the furious king. The dream of the rose without a thorn is about to turn into a nightmare, and the shadow of the Tower of London once again looms large, where history whispers you to sleep. The relentless rain continues to fall, a cold, unceasing curtain against the Tudor windows, mirroring the grim reality that is now unfolding within Hampton Court Palace. The joyous sounds that once filled its halls, Catherine Howard's laughter, the lively music, have been replaced by a suffocating silence, punctuated only by the nervous shuffle of feet and hushed, terrified whispers. The scent of fear is now overpowering, a sharp, metallic tang in the air that cuts through any lingering sweet perfumes. Archbishop Cranmer, clutching the damning testimonies and confessions, finally brings the terrible news to King Henry. You can almost feel the tremor of the parchment in his hands as he approaches the monarch. The king is at Mass in the Chapel Royal, a place of supposed sanctity. It is All Saints' Day, a day meant for solemn remembrance, not for shattering revelations. Cranmer, with utmost caution, places the documents in Henry's hand. The king, already burdened by his physical ailments and the weight of his previous marital failures, initially refuses to believe what he reads. He is in denial, convinced that his rose without a thorn is pure and innocent. He dismisses the accusations as malicious gossip, slander from disgruntled former servants. Imagine the sheer audacity of bringing such news to a man known for executing those who displease him. This takes a special kind of courage, or perhaps desperation. But Cranmer, having conducted a thorough and careful investigation, is insistent. He has proof, undeniable testimonies from those who lived with Catherine and witnessed her youthful indiscretions. He has secured confessions from Manox and Derryham. The king, still reeling from the betrayal of Anne Boleyn, is hit by a wave of profound, agonizing shock. You see his face contort, first with disbelief, then with a dawning horror, and finally with a volcanic fury that radiates through the very stone of the palace. His rage, when it finally erupts, is terrifying. He lets out a roar of anguish and anger that reverberates through the chapel, silencing every single soul within its sacred walls. It is the sound of a man betrayed, not just by a wife, but by the very ideal of innocence and purity he so desperately sought in his final marriage. The palace is immediately plunged into chaos. The investigation turns frantic, no longer discreet. Every servant, every lady-in-waiting, anyone who ever had contact with Catherine is interrogated. The air crackles with suspicion. The sound of rapid footsteps echoing through the long corridors, the sharp commands of guards, the hushed questioning in private chambers, it all contributes to an atmosphere of paranoia. No one is safe from the king's wrath. You can almost feel the cold, clammy sweat on the brows of those being questioned. There are no Miranda rights here, no lawyers to advise you. You answer, truthfully or otherwise, or face the rack. Catherine Howard herself is confined to her chambers. The young queen, once so vivacious and full of life, is now reduced to a terrified, desperate figure. You hear her cries, her pleas, her moments of hysterical laughter followed by bouts of profound despair. She is barely out of her teens, a child in the grand and ruthless game of royal politics. The delicious meals served to her are now untouched, the sweet wines left undrunk, replaced by the bitter taste of fear and isolation. Her fine gowns hang heavy on her, symbols of a life that is rapidly slipping away. Historians still debate whether Catherine truly understood the gravity of her situation. Was she simply naive and foolish, or was she willfully reckless? The truth is likely a complex blend of both. The investigation unearths even more damaging information. Not only had Catherine engaged in sexual relationships before her marriage to the king, but there are now allegations of indiscretions after her marriage. A young gentleman of the Privy Chamber, Thomas Culpeper, a handsome and favored courtier, is implicated. He is accused of having a secret relationship with the Queen, facilitated by Lady Rochford, the sister-in-law of the executed Anne Boleyn. This later alleged affair, if true, would be outright treason, a crime against the king himself, and distinct from the pre-contract issues. This shocking tidbit reveals the ongoing, dangerous game of power and infidelity that was a constant undercurrent at court. The sound of Henry's rage and grief is a constant backdrop to these unfolding events. He alternates between furious denunciations and moments of profound, heartbroken despair. He had adored this girl, had believed her to be his redemption, his last chance at happiness. The betrayal cuts him to the core, impacting him perhaps more deeply than any previous marital crisis. He had been so sure that she was innocent, and the revelation of her past and potentially her present shatters that fragile illusion. His belief in his own judgment, already scarred by the Anne Boleyn affair, is utterly destroyed. On November 12, 1541, Archbishop Cranmer and other high-ranking officials visit Catherine in her apartments. You observe her, a shell of her former self, trembling and weeping. She eventually confesses to her premarital relationships with Manox and Derryham, but she vehemently denies any post-marital infidelity with Culpeper. Her confession, though coerced and under immense pressure, essentially seals her fate. It confirms the pre-contract issue, making her marriage to Henry invalid, and thus her alleged treason with Culpeper even more damning in the eyes of the law. There's no appeal process like today. Once the king's mind is made up and the evidence gathered, the outcome is largely predetermined. The king, feeling profoundly humiliated and betrayed, orders the arrest of all those implicated. Derryham and Culpeper are subjected to the brutal tortures of the Tower and confess to their crimes. You can almost hear the agony of their cries, faint and distant, within the cold stone walls. Both men are executed in December, disemboweled and quartered for treason, a truly horrific spectacle meant to deter any future transgressions. Lady Rochford, who had facilitated the meetings, is also arrested. She loses her mind under the stress and torture, but is nonetheless found guilty and condemned. Catherine Howard is stripped of her title as Queen. She is moved from Hampton Court to Sion Abbey, and then, inevitably, to the Tower of London. The sound of the Thames lapping against the barge as she is transported must have sounded like the tolling of her death knell. The chill of the Tower's stone walls, the damp, musty smell of its dungeons, must have been a terrifying contrast to the silk sheets and warm fires of her royal chambers. A bill of attainder is passed through Parliament, condemning Catherine and Lady Rochford without a formal trial, based on the collected evidence and confessions. This legal maneuver allows for a quicker, less public condemnation, avoiding the potential embarrassments of a full trial. This demonstrates the king's continued manipulation of the legal system to serve his personal and political ends. On February 13, 1542, on a cold, gray morning, you stand once again on the Tower Hill, the air heavy with moisture and the pervasive smell of wood smoke from distant fires. Catherine Howard, dressed in black velvet, walks to the scaffold. Her youth is starkly apparent against the grim backdrop. She is just 19 or 20 years old. She makes a brief, composed speech, asking for mercy on her soul and admitting her premarital misconduct. She dies with dignity, her final moments marked by quiet courage. The thud of the axe, a dull, sickening sound, brings her short, tragic reign to an end. Her body is laid to rest in an unmarked grave near her cousin, Anne Boleyn, in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the Tower. Two young queens, both cousins, both executed on the same ground. It's a haunting, sobering thought. The court breathes a collective sigh of relief, but it is a weary one. The king, devastated and now deeply suspicious of women, enters a period of profound reclusion. The sound of the rain continues, a constant, mournful backdrop to the grim history being made. He would now be even more cautious, seeking not beauty or passion, but something far more practical, far safer in his next and final queen. The resilience of those who survived the king's volatile affections is astonishing, yet the cost of failure is absolute. The seemingly endless rain outside has finally abated, leaving behind a sky of muted gray and an air that is damp and heavy, much like the mood within the royal palaces. After the catastrophic failure of his marriage to Catherine Howard, King Henry VIII, now in his early 50s and grotesquely obese, his leg ulcer perpetually oozing and in constant pain, is a changed man. The vibrant, athletic prince of your first glimpse is gone, replaced by a suspicious, irascible, and profoundly ill monarch. He is wary, deeply mistrustful of women, and the court knows that his next marriage will be a matter of pragmatism, not passion. You feel the shift in the atmosphere. The flamboyant displays of previous years have given way to a more subdued, cautious environment. The scent of fear, always present, now mingles with the odors of illness and decay that subtly emanate from the king's chambers. The sound of his labored breathing, the grunts of pain as he moves, are heard by those closest to him. His temper is unpredictable, his patience worn thin. No one dares to suggest a new queen lightly. The woman who eventually steps into this perilous role is Catherine Parr. She is a fascinating choice for Henry's sixth and final wife. You see her now, not a young, giddy girl like Catherine Howard, nor a demure beauty like Jane Seymour. Catherine Parr is a mature woman in her early 30s, twice a widow, and already possessed of considerable life experience. She is intelligent, cultured, and well-educated, with a strong interest in religious reform. Her gowns, while still luxurious, are perhaps a little less flamboyant, reflecting her more serious and scholarly nature. Her presence seems to bring a much-needed sense of calm and order to the king's increasingly chaotic domestic life. The air around her has a soothing quality, perhaps the scent of clean linen and well-tended gardens, a stark contrast to the drama of earlier queens. Their marriage takes place in July of 1543, a quiet ceremony at Hampton Court Palace. By this point, the public reaction is muted. The kingdom has grown accustomed to the king's marital merry-go-round. This is not a love match, not in the traditional sense, but it is a marriage of profound convenience for both parties. For Henry, Catherine Parr offers companionship, a steady hand to manage his household, and a proven ability to produce heirs. Her previous marriages, though short, had produced children, though none survived. For Catherine, it offers immense prestige and an opportunity to further her religious and educational interests. You observe her in her new role. She approaches the king not as a lover, but as a devoted nurse, a companion, and an intellectual equal. She patiently tends to his painful leg, enduring the sight and smell of his festering wounds. She listens to his increasingly long and rambling discourses on theology. She engages him in discussions on books and religious ideas, a stark contrast to Catherine Howard, who had little interest in such matters. This ability to engage him intellectually, rather than just physically or superficially, is a key reason for her remarkable survival. She offers a level of intellectual companionship that was rare for women of her time, a point that historians often highlight as crucial to her success. One of Catherine Parr's most significant achievements, and one you witness firsthand, is her role in reuniting the royal family. Henry's 3 children, the sickly young Prince Edward, the staunchly Catholic Princess Mary, Catherine of Aragon's daughter, and the brilliant Protestant Princess Elizabeth Anne Boleyn's daughter, are living largely separate lives and often in strained relationships with their father. Mary and Elizabeth, in particular, had been declared illegitimate and suffered years of emotional neglect and humiliation. Catherine Parr, with her innate warmth and diplomatic skill, works tirelessly to mend these fractured relationships. You see her speaking gently with Mary, whose stern demeanor slowly softens under the Queen's kindness. You observe her encouraging Elizabeth, whose sharp mind finds a kindred spirit in the Queen's intellectual curiosity. She brings them back to court, ensures their education continues, and creates a more stable, loving environment for them. You hear the sounds of children's voices, young and old, in the royal nursery and schoolrooms, a refreshing change from the oppressive silence of past years. This act of drawing the royal children together, providing them with a semblance of a family unit, is a testament to her human resilience and empathy. It's almost like she's running a complex, high-stakes blended family, without the benefit of family therapists or online parenting forums. Catherine's household becomes a hub of religious discussion and learning. She is a devout Protestant, but a cautious one. She is careful not to push the king too far in his old age, knowing his volatile nature, and his occasional swings back towards more conservative Catholic practices. She publishes books, including prayers and meditations, making her the first English queen to publish her own works under her own name, a unique and significant historical tidbit. The smell of ink and parchment, of scholarly pursuits, pervades her private apartments. However, even Catherine Parr, with all her wisdom and caution, is not entirely safe from the dangers of the king's court. As a proponent of Protestant reform, she inevitably draws the ire of the conservative Catholic faction at court, led by men like Stephen Gardiner, the Bishop of Winchester, and Thomas Wriothesley, the Lord Chancellor. These men see her influence over the king as dangerous, fearing she might push him further towards radical Protestantism, and possibly even encourage the young Prince Edward in that direction. You hear the quiet plotting, the subtle accusations of heresy whispered into the king's increasingly suspicious ear. These men compile a list of charges against Catherine, focusing on her reformist views and her tendency to sometimes argue with the king on theological points. They paint her as a dangerous radical, a threat to the stability of the realm. The king, old and ailing, listens to these accusations, his trust easily swayed. You can feel the tension building, a familiar, chilling pattern re-emerging. Catherine Parr, for all her composure, is walking on thin ice. Her very survival depends on her wit, her understanding of the king, and her remarkable ability to adapt to the unpredictable currents of the Tudor court. The sound of the rain, no longer a downpour but a light drizzle, whispers a warning that even in apparent calm, storms can gather quickly. The lingering dampness in the air, a scent of wet stone and earth, marks the end of the rain outside. But the atmosphere within the palace remains charged with a different kind of tension. Catherine Parr, King Henry's sixth queen, for all her wisdom and steady demeanor, is not immune to the treacherous currents of the Tudor court. The king, now a shadow of his former self, his leg ulcer a constant source of agony, his once powerful body swollen and diseased, is increasingly paranoid and susceptible to the machinations of those around him. You can almost feel the heat emanating from his festering wounds, a sickly, sweet odor that permeates his private chambers, masked imperfectly by potent unguents and perfumes. You observe Catherine's daily life, a masterclass in quiet diplomacy and relentless caregiving. She tends to the king's ulcer, a task few others would willingly undertake, enduring the sight and smell of his decaying flesh. This intimate act of nursing solidifies her position as an indispensable companion, far more than just a wife. She reads to him, discusses philosophy and theology, and provides a calming presence amidst his frequent outbursts of pain and rage. The sound of her soft, measured voice reading aloud in the king's private apartments becomes a constant, comforting presence amidst the general unease. But even this devotion cannot entirely protect her. The conservative faction at court, led by Bishop Gardiner and Lord Chancellor Wriothesley, views her reformist inclinations with deep suspicion. They fear her influence over the king and, more crucially, over the young Prince Edward, who is being educated by Protestant tutors, hand-picked by Catherine. This fear fuels their plotting. They begin to compile a list of her alleged heresies, carefully noting every instance where she might have expressed views deemed too radical by the king's increasingly conservative advisors. You hear the whispers, the hushed conversations between Gardiner and his allies. They accuse her of straying from the official doctrine, of holding secret Protestant sympathies that go beyond the king's own reforms. They believe she is actively undermining the Catholic traditions that Henry, for all his break with Rome, still largely maintained. Imagine the weight of those whispers, the way they can build and twist simple actions into treasonous offenses. It's a terrifying testament to how easily a reputation and a life could be destroyed by a single malicious rumor. There's no fact-checking website to verify the truth of these claims. The smell of conspiracy is almost tangible now, mixing with the scent of burning coals from the palace fires. A warrant for Catherine's arrest is secretly drawn up. You can almost see the quills scratching on the parchment, the formal language of condemnation being drafted. The king, convinced by Gardiner's arguments that Catherine is an unrepentant heretic who is undermining his authority, gives his assent. This is a mainstream historical fact that highlights the extreme danger she faced. Henry authorized her arrest, believing her to be a serious threat. The moment of crisis arrives. The arrest warrant is mistakenly dropped or left visible near Catherine's private chambers. One of her ladies-in-waiting, or perhaps a sympathetic courtier, finds it. You imagine the cold shock that must have gripped Catherine's heart as she saw her own name, alongside the accusations of heresy, on that official document. The sound of her own rapid breathing must have filled her ears. She knows the fate of her predecessors. She knows the terrifying efficiency with which the king can destroy those who displease him. This is no mere marital disagreement. This is a matter of life and death, of salvation or damnation. Catherine, despite her terror, does not panic. Her intelligence and remarkable human resilience come to the fore. She immediately seeks out the king. She comes to him, purportedly to apologize for ever having dared to argue with him on matters of religion. She feigns illness, claiming she was merely seeking to distract him from his pain by engaging him in debate. She tells him that she values his learned opinion above all others, and that any disagreement on her part was merely to provoke him into revealing his vast knowledge, to learn from his superior wisdom. It's a remarkable performance, a brilliant example of quick thinking and strategic submission. You watch as she speaks, her voice soft but firm, her eyes deferential, carefully concealing her true fear. The king, flattered by her humility and intelligence, falls for the ruse. He values being seen as a great scholar and theologian, and Catherine expertly plays to this vanity. He finds her apology convincing, her explanation endearing. The smell of her cunning, mixed with the king's unwashed robes, fills the chamber. Just hours later, a horrifying scene unfolds. Bishop Gardiner and Lord Chancellor Wriothesley arrive with guards to arrest the Queen, completely unaware that the king has had a change of heart. You see their faces, expectant with triumph, suddenly fall into confusion as Henry emerges from his chamber, clearly agitated. He dismisses them with a furious roar, calling Gardiner a beast and a fool, sending them away in disgrace. The sound of his furious bellow, the crashing of furniture, must have echoed through the palace, a testament to his renewed favor for his queen and his displeasure with her accusers. It's a truly shocking, almost comedic scene of dramatic reversal, a quirk of history that saved a queen. Catherine Parr has survived. She not only survives, but her enemies, Gardiner and Wriothesley, are disgraced and fall from the king's favor. She continues to tend to the increasingly frail Henry, acting as a devoted nurse and a surrogate mother to his 3 children. Her presence ensures a degree of stability and domestic harmony in the king's final years, a stark contrast to the marital turmoil that preceded her. She provides the soothing rhythm to the king's tumultuous life, a calming presence amidst the growing sounds of his illness. The king's health continues its relentless decline. His ulcer grows worse, his body increasingly unwieldy. The final years are filled with pain and frustration. You hear the sounds of his groans, his labored breathing, and the constant shuffling of attendants. The atmosphere around him is one of exhaustion and impending death. Catherine Parr continues her unwavering care, a quiet, steadfast presence to the end. On January 28, 1547, the king finally dies. The sound of muffled sobs, of relieved sighs, of nervous consultations fills the palace. The long, tumultuous reign of Henry VIII is over. Catherine Parr, remarkably, outlived the king. She is the only one of his 6 wives to do so, a testament to her intelligence, resilience, and extraordinary ability to navigate the deadly politics of the Tudor court. After the king's death, she quickly marries her true love, Thomas Seymour, the ambitious brother of the late Queen Jane Seymour. However, her life post-Henry is short and not without its own tragedies and scandals. But for now, you focus on her triumph. She survived. Her legacy as the queen who reunited the royal family and championed reform lives on. The faint sound of new footsteps echoes through the palace as Prince Edward, a young boy of only 9, steps forward to claim his father's throne, and with him, the next chapter of England's story begins. The heavy, almost palpable silence that followed the death of King Henry VIII eventually lifts, replaced by a nervous energy. The rain outside has ceased entirely, leaving a crisp, clear air that feels both fresh and profoundly uncertain. A child king, Edward VI, now sits on the throne. He is just 9 years old, a frail but intelligent boy, the son Henry VIII had so desperately craved. You observe him, a small figure swallowed by the immense regality of his father's court. His youth, however, means that power now resides not with him, but with the men who govern in his name. His uncle Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, and later John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. You feel the immediate shift in the religious landscape. Under Edward's short reign, England moved decisively towards Protestantism, far beyond the cautious reforms of Henry VIII. The sound of Catholic Mass is replaced by services in English, the old Latin prayers silenced. Statues and images are removed from churches. Stained glass windows depicting saints are smashed, and altars are replaced with communion tables. The scent of incense, once a staple of religious ceremonies, fades, replaced by the cleaner, sparser air of Protestant worship. This is a mainstream historical fact. Edward's reign saw a rapid and radical Protestantization of England. For Princess Mary, the devoutly Catholic daughter of Catherine of Aragon, this period is one of profound humiliation and suffering. You see her, now a woman in her late 30s, her face etched with the pain of years of rejection and religious persecution. Her dark hair, like her mother's, is often covered by a severe coif, her gown somber. She has already endured the annulment of her parents' marriage, her own declaration of illegitimacy, and years of separation from her beloved mother. Now, under her half-brother's rule, her faith, the very bedrock of her identity, is under attack. The atmosphere around her is one of constant pressure. You hear the ceaseless demands from Edward's council, urging her, even commanding her, to abandon the Catholic Mass and conform to the new Protestant religion. Imagine the relentless badgering, the constant threats from men who hold her life in their hands. The very air she breathes seems to thicken with disapproval. You can almost taste the bitterness of her daily struggle. There's no religious freedom hotline, no safe space to practice her faith in secret. Mary, however, remains unyielding. She is her mother's daughter, possessing the same unshakable conviction and stubborn resilience. She insists on hearing Mass in her private chapel, defying the king and his council. You hear the defiant prayers, the Latin words echoing softly within her chambers, a quiet act of rebellion in a world determined to silence her faith. This is a fascinating, quirky tidbit. Mary's unwavering insistence on practicing her faith, even in the face of immense pressure, was seen as both heroic by her supporters and dangerously defiant by her opponents. The council sends delegations to her, sometimes polite, sometimes threatening. You witness her confrontations with them, her small, frail figure standing firm against their demands. Her voice, though not loud, carries the weight of conviction. She argues passionately, citing her conscience, her duty to God, and her loyalty to the faith of her parents. Her resilience in maintaining her Catholic faith, despite the threat of imprisonment or even execution, is truly remarkable. She often claims she would rather lay her head on the block than abandon her beliefs. The relationship between Mary and her young half-brother, Edward, becomes strained. You see the coldness in his eyes, his youthful but firm conviction that his sister is stubbornly misguided. He is a fervent Protestant, steeped in the new doctrines, and genuinely believes he is saving her soul by forcing her to convert. He sees her resistance not as piety, but as defiance of God's will and his royal authority. The very concept of religious tolerance, as you understand it, is alien to this era. Mary's pain is not just spiritual. She is financially squeezed, her household diminished, her movements restricted. She is constantly under scrutiny, her every action reported back to the council. She lives with the constant fear of imprisonment in the Tower, the ultimate fate for those who defy the crown. The sound of horses approaching her estate, even if it is just a messenger, must have sent a chill down her spine. The smell of fear, a familiar scent in Tudor England, is a constant companion. Meanwhile, Princess Elizabeth, Anne Boleyn's daughter, navigates this turbulent religious landscape with remarkable skill. You observe her, a young woman already demonstrating the shrewd political instincts that will define her later reign. While privately Protestant, she is careful not to antagonize Mary or the powerful Catholic factions. She studies, she learns, she bides her time. She learns from Mary's very public and painful ordeal, understanding the importance of subtlety and discretion in a world where overt defiance can be deadly. The young King Edward, however, is not long for this world. He is a sickly boy, prone to illness. His health rapidly deteriorated in 1553. The royal physicians, unable to cure his lung consumption, can only watch as he wastes away. The air in the palace is thick with the scent of sickness, of dying embers. You hear the increasingly labored breathing of the young king, the sound of his coughs racking his thin body. As Edward nears death, he makes a final, desperate move to prevent the Catholic Mary from taking the throne. He names Lady Jane Grey, his Protestant cousin, as his heir, bypassing both Mary and Elizabeth. This attempt to alter the succession by will, despite Parliament's earlier act of succession, throws the kingdom into a terrifying, brief dynastic crisis. On July 6, 1553, Edward VI dies. The news is initially kept secret, creating a tense, unnatural silence. Then, the announcement of Lady Jane Grey as Queen sparks immediate outrage among many, particularly those loyal to Mary. The country, weary of religious upheaval and tired of political maneuvering, rallies around Mary, the legitimate, if Catholic, heir. You see Mary's remarkable transformation. From a persecuted princess, she emerges as a strong, determined leader. She rides to London, gathering support as she goes. The sound of cheering crowds, of bells ringing for her, of loyal noblemen flocking to her banner, echoes across the land. Her years of suffering have forged in her an unshakable resolve, a steely determination that will now guide her reign. Her resilience in the face of persecution has prepared her for this moment. She is coming to claim her birthright, and with it, to restore the faith she so devoutly believes in, no matter the cost. The sky remains clear, but a storm, a religious firestorm, is about to engulf England, initiated by the woman known to history as Bloody Mary. Let the past sing you to sleep. The clear sky that greeted Mary's ascent to the throne quickly becomes overshadowed by the ominous clouds of religious zealotry. The air, once filled with the cautious hope for a stable succession, now crackles with a fierce, unwavering determination. Mary Tudor, crowned Queen Mary I, wasted no time. Her years of humiliation, her mother's suffering, and her own steadfast adherence to the Catholic faith had forged in her an iron will. You feel the intensity of her conviction, a powerful force radiating from her, a blend of piety and profound grief. You observe her early actions. Her first priority is to reverse the Protestant reforms of her father and half-brother and return England to the bosom of the Roman Catholic Church. The sound of Latin Mass, once banned, now rings out in every church. Statues and altars are painstakingly restored, and the scent of incense, once absent, again fills the air, heavy and sweet. Clergymen who had married under the Protestant reforms are forced to leave their wives or face deprivation. Mary even goes so far as to restore the Pope's authority in England, an act that her father had violently opposed. This is a mainstream historical fact. Mary's reign was defined by her zealous attempts to undo the English Reformation. The initial public reaction is mixed. Many ordinary people, weary of constant religious change and clinging to the old traditions, welcome the return of Catholicism. They had missed the saints, the rituals, the familiar comfort of the old ways. You hear their quiet sighs of relief, the sounds of their renewed participation in long band ceremonies. But for the fervent Protestants who had embraced the new faith, it is a time of terror. Mary's devotion to her faith is absolute, but it is deeply intertwined with her personal life and her desire for a strong Catholic heir. She believes that her inability to conceive a child is a sign of God's displeasure, and that only by purging England of heresy can she earn his favor. You feel the weight of this personal burden, this desperate need for a child to secure her legacy and her religious mission. This deeply personal motivation for her religious policy is a critical historical insight. Her marriage to Philip of Spain, the son of the powerful Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, adds another layer of complexity and unpopularity to her reign. You hear the public outcry, the grumbling in the taverns, the angry shouts in the streets. The idea of an English queen marrying a foreign prince, especially a powerful Catholic Spaniard, is deeply unpopular. The smell of xenophobia, mixed with religious fear, hangs heavy in the London air. Many fear that England will become a mere province of Spain, its independence swallowed up by a powerful foreign empire. You can almost taste the bitter resentment in the common beer. There were no public opinion polls, but the sheer volume of anti-Spanish sentiment was clear. As the years pass, Mary's zeal intensifies. The initial attempts at persuasion give way to harsher measures. You hear the stories, whispered in dread-filled tones, of Protestant preachers being arrested, of their writings being burned. The feeling of suspicion permeates every aspect of life. Neighbors report on neighbors. To even express a doubt about Catholic doctrine is to invite grave danger. And then the persecutions begin in earnest. In February 1555, the first Protestant martyrs are burned at the stake. You are a silent witness to these horrifying events. You stand in the crowd, the air thick with the acrid smell of burning flesh and smoke. The sound of the crackling fire, the cries of the condemned, the murmurs of the horrified onlookers, these are sounds that sear themselves into your memory. You hear the courageous defiance of the martyrs, their prayers, and their declarations of faith echoing in the flames. You hear the solemn pronouncements of the church officials, justifying these terrible acts as a necessary purification of the land. Mary genuinely believes these burnings are acts of mercy, saving souls from eternal damnation. She is convinced that she is doing God's will, purging heresy from her kingdom. She is often seen as a cold, cruel monarch, but historians debate whether she was truly sadistic or simply misguided by an overwhelming, perhaps desperate sense of religious duty. We can only speculate about the true nature of her inner torment. Over the next 3 years, nearly 300 Protestants are burned at the stake. This horrific death, the ultimate punishment for heresy, earns Mary the infamous and enduring nickname, Bloody Mary. You see the grim determination in her eyes, even as her own health begins to fail. She experiences phantom pregnancies, believing herself to be with child, only to suffer crushing disappointment. Each perceived failure only hardens her resolve to root out heresy, as if more burnings will finally earn her God's favor. The relentless sound of the wind, now picking up outside, seems to carry the cries of the condemned across the land. Mary's reign is short, brutal, and ultimately unsuccessful in its primary aim. Despite the widespread persecutions, Protestantism is not extinguished. Instead, the sight of so many martyrs dying steadfastly for their faith strengthens the resolve of many Protestants. The very act of attempting to stamp out the new religion inadvertently solidifies its roots in England. The smell of martyrdom, of defiant belief, creates a legacy that will shape the future. In 1558, Mary's health rapidly deteriorated. She is ill, heartbroken, and increasingly isolated. The loss of Calais, England's last continental possession, to the French is a final, crushing blow. You hear her mournful cry, "When I am dead and opened, you shall find Calais lying in my heart." On November 17, 1558, Mary I dies, likely from uterine cancer or an ovarian cyst. The sound of her last breath is a quiet, almost imperceptible whisper in the cold chamber. The kingdom breathes a collective sigh of relief, though cautiously. The relentless religious persecutions cease. For the people of England, the era of bloodshed for faith, at least for a time, is over. The air seems to lighten immediately, as if a great weight has been lifted. The crown now passes to her half-sister, Princess Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, a woman who has navigated the treacherous waters of 2 previous reigns with remarkable astuteness and resilience. Her path to the throne has been one of constant danger and careful survival. Now, she is queen, and a new, golden age of England is about to begin, shaped by the tumultuous reigns of her parents and sister. Echoes of the past, whispered for your rest. The solemn silence that had fallen with Queen Mary's last breath is swiftly broken by the sound of bells, ringing across London and throughout England. But this time the bells carry a different cadence, not the heavy toll of grief or the anxious peal of fear, but a triumphant, almost joyous peal. The air feels lighter, cleaner, as if a great storm has finally passed. The pervasive smell of fear and religious persecution that clung to Mary's reign dissipates, replaced by a cautious, yet undeniable scent of hope and new beginnings. You watch as Princess Elizabeth, the daughter of the executed Anne Boleyn, takes the throne. She is 25 years old, a woman forged in the crucible of extraordinary hardship. You remember her as the young child declared illegitimate by her own father, then as the vulnerable teenager navigating the perilous court of her half-brother, Edward. Finally, you recall her living under the constant threat of imprisonment and death during her sister Mary's reign, suspected of heresy and treason simply by virtue of her Protestant faith and her very existence. You recall her careful movements, her guarded words, her quiet determination during those fraught years. Her ability to survive such a tumultuous and dangerous childhood is a testament to an exceptional level of intelligence, caution, and human resilience. She learned to dissemble, to observe, and to wait. Now, as she rides through the cheering streets of London during her coronation procession, you see her not as the slight, anxious figure you remember, but as a queen. Her red gold hair, inherited from her father, catches the pale winter sunlight. Her eyes, famously sharp and intelligent, sparkle with a fierce awareness. Her gowns of rich gold and crimson velvet shimmer with embroidery and jewels, asserting her regal authority. She is not conventionally beautiful in the way a courtier might describe, but she possesses an undeniable charisma, a magnetic presence that commands attention. The crowds roar her name, a powerful sound that vibrates through the cobblestones beneath your feet. Elizabeth's first and most crucial task is to bring religious peace to a fractured kingdom. You recall the violent swings from Catholicism to Protestantism under her father and brother, and then Mary's brutal reversal. The country is exhausted by religious strife. Elizabeth, a Protestant herself, chooses a middle path, a pragmatic compromise known as the Elizabethan religious settlement. She reestablishes the Church of England, with herself as its supreme governor, a slightly softer title than her father's supreme head, but with the same ultimate authority. The sound of English prayers and services returns, but with enough familiar ceremony and ritual to appease many traditionalists. The scent of incense, though not as heavy as in Mary's time, is allowed to return to some churches. You feel a collective sigh of relief ripple across the land. The burnings cease. People are no longer put to death for their beliefs, at least not openly and systematically. While dissenters still face penalties, the extreme persecution ends. This remarkable act of political and religious balancing is a hallmark of her reign, and historians still debate the extent to which Elizabeth genuinely held strong Protestant beliefs versus a pragmatic desire for stability above all else. Her genius lay in her ability to create a broad church that could encompass a wide range of beliefs without descending into civil war. The air in the court under Elizabeth is different. There is a renewed intellectual vigor, a celebration of learning and artistry that reminds you of her father's early reign, but with a more sophisticated, less brutal edge. The sound of music, especially the lute and virginals, is often heard from her private chambers, as Elizabeth herself is an accomplished musician. The smell of fresh ink and parchment is common as poets and playwrights begin to flourish, laying the groundwork for the golden age of English literature. One of the most persistent and defining aspects of Elizabeth's reign is the question of her marriage. You hear the constant pressure from her advisors, from Parliament, and from foreign ambassadors, urging her to marry and produce an heir. Imagine having every decision scrutinized like that. Every potential partner weighed for political advantage or disadvantage, except without the option to simply mute the notifications or block the calls. It's a relentless, inescapable badgering that continues for decades. You watch as she masterfully deflects these demands, playing one suitor against another, always prioritizing England's interests over personal ties. This strategic use of her unmarried status is a unique and groundbreaking political move. By remaining unmarried, she avoids entangling England in foreign alliances through marriage and retains absolute control of her foreign policy. She becomes the Virgin Queen, a powerful symbol of England's independence and her own personal sacrifice for her kingdom. This is a mainstream historical fact, central to her enduring image. But her reign is far from peaceful. You sense the constant threat from Catholic powers in Europe, particularly Spain, and the internal plots by those who wish to replace her with the Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots. You hear the whispers of conspiracies, the sound of spies moving through shadows. Elizabeth navigates these dangers with cunning and courage, relying on loyal advisors like William Cecil and Francis Walsingham to uncover plots and eliminate threats. The smell of danger is ever present, a constant undercurrent beneath the glittering court. The climax of this external threat comes with the Spanish Armada in 1588. You feel the collective dread, and then the surging pride as the massive Spanish fleet sails towards England. The sound of cannons roaring, the flapping of sails in the wind, the cheers of English sailors, these fill the air. Elizabeth rides among her troops at Tilbury, dressed in armor, declaring she has the heart and stomach of a king. The defeat of the Armada, aided by fierce storms, is a monumental triumph, cementing England's naval power and strengthening its Protestant identity. It's a truly powerful historical moment that resonated for centuries. Towards the end of her long reign, the court takes on a familiar air of decay and aging. The sound of Elizabeth's footsteps becomes slower, her famously sharp wit occasionally dulled by age. She outlives many of her closest advisors and friends, including the children of Henry VIII, leaving her isolated and melancholic. The feel of the aging queen, her body frail but her will still strong, is palpable. She is almost 70 when she dies in 1603, ending the Tudor dynasty after 118 years. Historians still widely agree that Elizabeth I was one of England's greatest monarchs. Her reign, the Golden Age, saw not only religious stability and national triumph, but also a flourishing of arts, exploration, and global influence. You recall the names: William Shakespeare, Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh. She built a strong, confident England, a nation that could stand on its own in the complex world of European powers. The resilience of this dynasty, from Henry's desperate quest for a son to Elizabeth's strategic unmarried state, is extraordinary. They were a family of immense ambition, terrifying power, and profound human drama. They shaped England forever. You are a sleepless historian. The last echoes of Tudor England now gently recede, like the final drops of rain hitting a quiet window pane. The grand palaces, once bustling with life, intrigue, and the relentless pursuit of power, begin to dissolve into the mists of time. The faces of Henry, Catherine, Anne, Jane, Catherine, Mary, and Elizabeth, once so vivid, soften and blur at the edges, becoming figures in a distant, fading tapestry. Their triumphs and their heartbreaks, their desperate hopes and their devastating falls, all whisper softly into the silence. You can almost feel the cool, clean air of a world without their dramatic struggles, appreciating the quiet hum of your own modern life. There is no longer the pervasive scent of fear or the sharp tang of ambition, only the faint, comforting aroma of your own peaceful space. The incessant clamor of the court, the sharp clang of the executioner's axe, the desperate cries for an heir, all give way to the gentle, rhythmic cadence of your own breathing. Let these ancient stories, these echoes of the past, now guide you deeper into slumber. Drift through time, dream through history. Your journey through their world is complete, and the present moment holds you securely in its gentle embrace.